also add a few more features like vitrification. So the learning objective of this, at the end of this chapter, you should be able to do the microbiological test. And if you join any quality assurance lab, you must be able to follow the standard operating procedures which are laid down. So any laboratory, or for that matter, if there's an ICU unit or an operation theater, each and every area should be totally clean, because if there is any type of contamination, whether it is bacterial or it is fungal, ultimately it is going to affect human beings. So even though you are studying in relation to plant tissue culture, for commercial viability, the plant material that you are trying to cultivate in vitro should not get contamination. If the contamination rate is high, it means commercial losses. Now, it is not only contamination. There are certain factors which also affect the development of the plant tissue being cultured. So let's have a look at it as to what are these different factors. Now, the first factor is tissue browning. Now, a common observation which you can correlate. It's very, very important that you should be able to correlate two different incidents and then say, oh, well, this is what I have observed and this is how it is when I do a tissue culture. So in tissue culture, when you're using an explant material, you are not inoculating it directly on the culture medium. Why? Because you are bringing the explant material, you are surface sterilizing it, and then you are cutting it into an appropriate size so that it will be the size that you require for growing it in tissue culture. If you recall, when you are doing micropropagation, the size of the explant was in millimeter. So you are going to use a scalpel or a sterile blade to cut the plant material. So when you are cutting the plant material, what are you doing? Wounding. So as a result of wounding response, there'll be substances which are released by the explant material. I give you a very simple correlation. If you have, I'm sure all of you do help at home, potatoes, then brinjal, then banana, then Amorphophallus, elephant foot. Anything else you can tell me? जो कट करेंगे तो पूरा ये हो जाता है ना, decolorize हो जाता है.
Apple.
Any other way? Apple, very good. And apple, yeah, good. What else?
Pear as well.
Pear as well. Okay. Any other vegetable? I told you potatoes, I told you suran, that is Amorphophallus or elephant foot, or I said brinjal. Brinjal. So what you do, you put it in water and keep, isn't it? A common thing that you do. And if you've seen potato chips being formed, they when they what you can say make it in the form of a chip, then the water contains either nimbu ka phool, citric acid, isn't it? Or it contains ascorbic acid, or it contains alum. See, these are common things which even though they are not educated, they follow it so that you don't want that to be decolorized, and then its commercial value will be less. Then why does it happen? Plants have a large number of secondary metabolites, among which phenolics form a very major category. Now, wounding is a type of stress to the plant. The moment a plant is wounded, for the plant, there is a signal saying that something normal is not happening. So as a result, defense mechanism is in place and you get formation of phenolics. These phenolics, if they leach out in the surrounding medium, it will result in what is known as tissue browning. So when you are putting in water, that means in your household, you're putting in water. And you know that in water, solubility of oxygen is less. That means you are not providing large amount of oxygen. And as a result, these phenolics are not oxidized and you are trying to minimize the browning process. You can do a very simple experiment and see. Cut potatoes without water and just keep it outside. Within no time, they'll become brown in color. But if the same potatoes you cut and put it in water, it is not going to get decolorized. Why? Because you are not giving much of oxygen. As a result, oxygen, since it is not available, these phenols are not oxidized, and as a result, you don't get browning. So the first important thing is the browning of the eggplant. And this has an extreme detrimental effect. We'll talk about it a little later as to what happens. You may think, oh, okay, if phenols are released, nothing will happen. No, these phenols are ultimately going to affect the growth and development of the eggplant. So what happens is, if the eggplant becomes brown, after some time it becomes necrotic and it will die, or your stage 1 itself will not be a success. Now, what are the factors which decide whether the eggplant is going to become brown or the eggplant will result in formation of more leachates? As I mentioned earlier, it depends on the plant material that you are trying to culture. So if the plant material as such has a large amount of phenolics in it, then obviously this browning would be accelerated. Now, this accumulation of phenolics is also age dependent. So if you've seen some of the plants, when they become mature, they result in more amount of phenolics being accumulated. And as a result, if you use eggplant material from an older culture, then this is what will happen. Hey, can you see the slide?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
देखो चुपचाप बैठ गई. I thought as much. So you have to speak. Purposely I did do slide share. So can you see it now? Yes or no?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So I gave you the learning objectives, and now I'm talking about the selection of eggplant material. And this eggplant material depends upon the type of material that you're trying to culture, but it also depends upon the age of the plant. So normally, if they're a young plant material, then the amount of exudates which will be liberated are comparatively less as compared to if you take an eggplant from older plants. Second factor is time of the year. It is not that throughout the year. Secondary metabolites are also accumulated depending upon the time of the year. So that is why whenever you are talking about natural products, there are many factors which are essential when you look at natural products. Now, what are these factors? These factors can be the age of the plant, the chemotype, where it is growing, and then it is also season dependent. There are seasons when the accumulation of these secondary products is higher. So therefore, time of the year when you excise the eggplant and use it for in vitro cultivation is also important. Now, what we shall be studying is why there is tissue browning. You already have done an experiment last year and we are going to revise it again. That is the assay of a very important enzyme known as polyphenol oxidases. PPO. Do you recall? Yes or no? You have done that, isn't it? In your MSc Part 1? None of you answer. You please answer. Anybody? There is an important enzyme known as polyphenol oxidases, and there is another enzyme called as tyrosinases. Does it ring a bell when I talk about tyrosinases?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay. Again, correlation. Your skin whitening cream. Okay. Why does the skin become fairer?
Melanin pigment.
Yeah, right.
Because of less.
So the cells, melanocytes, they accumulate a pigment. What is the name of that pigment?
Melanin.
Melanin. Very good. So what happens to how is melanin formed? So you have phenylalanine to tyrosine. Tyrosine will enter the pathway of melanin, and finally you get formation of melanin. So the enzyme which is responsible is tyrosinases. So this enzyme, if it is inhibited, then what will happen? The accumulation of melanin will be what? Less. And if melanin accumulation is less, then skin will become fair. Isn't it? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So can you think of some plant material which shows this? And I'm sure you know it. Banana ka skin dekha hai? Ripe banana?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you get, what is the skin color?
It is yellow but becomes
Yellow.
brown.
But then sometimes what happens, you start getting when it ripens. What do you
Yeah.
get?
Brown spots start
Yeah,
forming.
dark brown spot, then ultimately becoming black.
Brown.
Hai na?
Black. Yes.
That is all because of tyrosinases. So these tyrosinases, they result in deposition of, or rather conversion of these pigments into quinones, which ultimately bind with the proteins and they result in tissue browning. Now, there are people, okay, in cancer biology, I have read sudden appearance of what you can say, til ko kya bolte hain? What is a til called? Moles. Right? You say, right? Suddenly appearance of too many, what you can say, hyperpigmentation or moles is an indication of cancer, isn't it? Skin cancer.
Skin cancer. Yes.
How many of you heard this?
I have heard.
How many others have also should speak? You
Ma'am,
cannot
I
be
have
just
also
keeping
heard.
quiet.
I have.
Huh?
I have
I have
also
heard.
Heard, right? So there are
heard.
people who have developed what you can say diagnostic tools. So what they have done is they have used the banana peel as a model system. See, this has nothing to do with tissue culture, but I'm trying to tell you how one particular knowledge you can correlate with other fields. So what they have done is intensity of color can be measured in terms of an electrical impulse. So darker pigment, more melanin, you will get a higher signal, right? So a non-invasive method is there on a YouTube. You can go and see it. So non-invasive method for early cancer detection has been designed using this as a system. So what they have done is they have standardized. Using the banana peel, they have standardized this much amount of melanin means this is the signal that you will be getting. And then on patients who have developed these moles, they have used these non-invasive device and correlated. If more amount of pigmentation is there, that is an indication that there is a chance or it can be a skin cancer. Have you understood what I'm talking about? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
on the banana peel, those darkening of, see, ultimately then it becomes black in color, isn't it? That is all because of tyrosinase activity. So why does the tissue become brown? It is because of two important oxidases. One is polyphenol oxidase and the other one is tyrosinases. Mushrooms also, if you remember, mushroom, if you cut and keep it, they'll all become brown in color, isn't it? Yes?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so that is also phenolases, which is present, which is capable of utilizing phenols as a substrate. Now, as you can see in this, what you can say, tissue culture, the plant material has leached out so much of phenolic in the surrounding medium. As a result, the media has become totally brown in color. It is not only the visual appearance. This has got toxic effect resulting in the culture not growing properly. So media browning or exudates from the explant or later becomes a very big issue when you're talking about propagation of plants in vitro. So let us see what happens. So you have a polyphenols, as you can see. This is a typical structure of a polyphenol. There can be one or more hydroxyl groups. So depending on that, you have different types of polyphenols. And these polyphenols are oxidized. So you require oxygen. This is very, very important. You require oxygen for oxidizing these phenols. And they result in the formation of quinone. What do the quinones do? They don't keep quiet. They form complex with organic material or polymers, especially proteins and amino acids. And these polymers, when they are formed, they result in tissue browning. So they make these proteins and amino acids not available to the developing plant material, and as a result, tissue growth is hindered. Various examples of phenols, catechol. कथा में रहता है ना? You know what is acacia catechu?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So those who spit, why that color remains? That is because of catechol, right? Then you have tannic acid, catechol, gallic acid. These are different examples of polyphenols. So there is one example which is shown here, that is the browning in case of apple. So what is shown? You have a phenol, monophenol, and the polyphenol oxidases ultimately converting it into a quinone, and that quinone complexes with the proteins and amino acids present in the plant tissue, resulting in browning of plant tissue. So basically what you have to remember is that polyphenols are oxidized to form quinones by the enzyme polyphenol oxidase. So very important. For the functioning of this particular enzyme, you require oxygen. If oxygen is not there, the enzyme will be non-functional. So how do you take care of tissue browning? That is what we will be learning. So what are the causes of tissue browning? The wounded tissue releases enzymes such as polyphenol oxidases and tyrosinases. As I told you, tyrosinases will utilize a substrate that is tyrosine. But when you call it, you will call it as a phenolases. Say, look at this. It is, what is it called? Catecholases. But it is a type of phenolases. So together they all form phenolases, but depending on the type of substrate that they are utilizing, they will have different names. So if they have using polyphenols, then you say polyphenol oxidases. If they are going to use tyrosine, then you say tyrosinases. There are also tannases which use tannic acid. Then there are some which can use pigments or dyes. So that enzyme is lacases. So all of them have a capacity to oxidize these substrates. And as a result of this oxidation, you get browning. Now, tissues, what do they contain? They contain substrate for these enzymes. So there can be chlorogenic acid, there can be gallic acid or hydroxyphenols. Then why they are toxic to the tissue? Because the phenolics will bind reversibly to the proteins. How do they bind? By hydrogen bonding. So when proteins get bound, they will not be available for development, proper cell differentiation, proper growth and development of the explant, and ultimately the explant will become necrotic and it will die. So again, to revise, phenols oxidize to form quinones, which then cyclize, polymerize, or oxidizes the proteins to form brown colored or dark colored substances known as melanic compounds. For you as students, if you get a job in a natural product company, there are two components which are very important. Anything which will bring about skin lightening. So you have to look at material, natural products, which will inhibit these enzymes. So if the enzymes are inhibited, obviously melanic compounds will not be produced. But there is an equal demand, a demand for darkening. Can you give me an example where? Anybody?
Ma'am, in countries where there is a long winter.
Oh, no, I am talking, see, don't go very far. Go very near. अपना सर पे हाथ लगा के देखो, तुमको आंसर मिल जाएगा.
In hair products.
हाँ, hair
Dyes.
product में क्यों
Or
चाहिए?
those black shine
Dye.
shampoos and all.
No. Graying,
Dye.
premature graying of
Dye.
hair.
Yes.
Dye,
Yes.
dye.
Not only dye, you are looking at things which will prevent graying of hair, right? So you need an ulta, you need the enzyme to be, only Gauri answers, nobody else is answering. You need products which will, what the enzyme should be activated or inhibited?
Activated.
Activated. So you have to look at products which will activate the enzyme, due to which more amount of melanin will be deposited. So basic knowledge is very, very important. You must know the metabolic pathway and the factors which are control factors for either activating the enzyme or inhibiting the enzyme. So you must see, there cannot be, never in life there can be a direct answer. You have to correlate, okay, this is what I have studied and this is how I can correlate in a different aspect. So all these skin whitening creams, what do they contain? They contain an inhibitor for the enzyme tyrosinase. But whenever you use an inhibitor, it may have a long-term effect. See, you have seen people who have depigmentation, right, of the skin. Why they have depigmentation? Because melanin is not produced in adequate amounts, right? So as a result, you have spots, white and colored spots, vitiligo. Have you observed that? Small patches of white and normal skin. The reason is, in these patches, there is no formation of melanin pigment, and there could be mutations as a result of which the enzyme is not produced. So metabolic disorder could be one, or it could be an inhibitory factor due to which the enzyme is not functioning. So maybe there could be hope for people that if you activate the enzyme, melanin can be produced. So how do you prevent? In tissue culture, whenever the exudates are produced or you have tissue browning, then what is the solution? So you can remove the phenolics. So if substrate is not available, obviously the enzyme has nothing to act upon. So one method is removing. It is easier said than done. We will see how it can be done. Any enzyme requires a proper redox potential for its functioning. So you modify the redox potential, due to which the enzyme is rendered inactive. Then you inactivate the enzyme which are responsible for oxidation of these phenols. So you inactivate the enzyme. So you put substances which can inhibit the activity of enzymes like polyphenol oxidases. Again, there is another method which is being practiced is to reduce the activity of enzyme by limiting the availability of substrate. So these are some of the methods which are practiced. Now let us see how it is done in a plant tissue culture laboratory, because media browning, explant browning and death is a serious issue. So costs, say for example, if the explant material is laden, it has got large amount of phenolics, then immediately the moment you put it on a culture medium, the phenolics will be leached out or it will enter the surrounding substrate, that is the agar. And as a result, the culture medium will get brown, and as you know that these form quinones which interfere with the metabolism. So what you do, what did I say? Removing of phenolic products. How can you do that? So what do? You pre-treat the plant material. So when you are sterilizing the explant material, you soak it for some time in sterile water or in an unsupplemented medium. So when you do that, whatever leachates come out will come out in the medium which you can remove. And when most of the leachates are removed, you can use that fresh explant to culture. Are you understanding what I'm trying to say? That means you're literally washing the explant in a sterile medium or an unsupplemented medium to remove as much as possible the phenolics. So as a result, when your explant material has reduced amount of phenolics, that means substrate availability becomes a limiting factor. And when substrate is not available, obviously the enzyme will not be functioning at its optimal level. Are you with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then second, what you do, you culture it on a basal medium. That means you don't add any supplement. And what you observe is within 2-3 days, the entire medium has become brown because the substances have leached out and there has been oxidation. So then what you do, you transfer it to a fresh medium. That means what you're doing is you are changing the medium more frequently. But there are two disadvantages. One, it could become slightly costly because when you're doing a commercial process, a lot of labor will be involved in doing this transfer, and then you need to have fresh medium to transfer the explant material. But however, at the laboratory level, or if you're doing some R&D, then increasing the frequency of transfer to fresh medium till the medium remains clean is another alternative which is practiced for if the cause is leaching or dispersal. Third is, normally what happens is if there's a solid medium, then all these phenolics get trapped in the solid medium and get accumulated more. But if it is a liquid medium, what happens is the leaching is rapid, and moreover, because oxygen is comparatively not available in a large amount, it results in less browning of the explant. So what you do is initially you grow the explant in liquid medium so that everything will leach out in the liquid medium, and then you transfer that clean explant onto a solid medium for further experimentation. Now, how do you remove the phenolic? One important method is to supplement the medium with activated charcoal. All of you know activated charcoal, isn't it? You use it for removing odor. Most of your water filters contain these activated charcoal because activated charcoal can absorb quite a few things, especially particulate matter, or it is very good at absorbing odor. So if you want to remove odor, then you use activated charcoal. So you add activated charcoal. I'll be coming a little more detail about activated charcoal. So activated charcoal is used at a concentration of 0.1 to 0.2%. Sometimes a higher concentration may also be applied. Activated charcoal has a special role in plant tissue culture medium, which we shall discuss a little more in details, because activated charcoal is again a very good supplement in tissue culture. You add certain material. One important material is PVP. What is PVP? Polyvinyl pyrrolidone. What does it do? All the phenols are absorbed by PVP by hydrogen bonding. So obviously, if phenols are absorbed by PVP, there will be no substrate available, and therefore media browning will be totally prevented. So thereby preventing their oxidation. And what is the concentration which is applied? 0.5 to 2%. You can add, rather you can do pre-treatment of the explant in a liquid medium containing PVP, and once the explant is clean, you can transfer the explant to a regular basal medium or a supplemented medium. Then you modify the redox potential of the culture medium so that oxidation will not take place or the enzyme will not be functional. Then very, very simple and widely used technique is to add reducing agents, or very popularly known as antioxidants, like vitamin C, ascorbic acid, citric acid, cysteine hydrochloride, dithioethol, mercaptoethanol, glutathione. All these are substances which will sequester the oxygen. As a result, the enzyme will be rendered non-functional. What is the concentration it is used? 150 milligram per liter. Sometimes the explant is pre-treated in liquid medium containing ascorbic acid or any of these antioxidants. Now, alternatively, you can add these antioxidants or reducing agent in the culture medium, but you have to take care that the pH is not altered. You can reduce the oxygen availability by reducing the head space or by not agitating the medium to an optimal level. Because you know that when you put the liquid medium on a shaker, you are agitating it so that oxygen will dissolve properly and it will promote the growth of tissue in culture. However, if you have a static medium, then comparatively the oxygen availability is less, and as a result, the phenols will not be oxidized, or for that matter, the enzyme machinery will come to an halt. So these are some of these mechanisms which are used for removing the phenolic substances. So once you remove the phenolic substance, substrate availability is not there. And if substrate is not available, the enzyme has nothing to act upon, and as a result, browning is hindered. Now let's look at the function of activated charcoal. Now, how is activated charcoal formed? Wood is burnt at a very high temperature, either by using air or by using steam, and you get activated charcoal, or it is carbonized wood. It has tremendous adsorptive properties. It can absorb compounds secreted from cultured tissue or growth inhibitory substances. That means anything which is toxic to the explant can be absorbed by activated charcoal. However, it has a flip side. When you add it in the culture medium, then plant growth regulators can also get absorbed, and those are not available for the explant for growth and development. Similarly, if you are not careful while making the medium, then what happens is agar may also get absorbed, and you will get ultimately you will end up in a culture medium which is semi-solid, or you will have like a whey. The water is on one side and activated charcoal with all agar and everything on one side. So making this medium is equally tricky, and you have to develop that expertise to make a culture medium with activated charcoal. So the concentration of activated charcoal should be optimized. And in embryogenesis, activated charcoal, for some plant species, it has been observed that it promotes what you can say somatic embryos formation. It also promotes rooting, sort of a dark, what you can say, dark area is created as a result of activated charcoal, and due to this, rooting is enhanced. So for rooting, very often in stage, when stage 3 to 4, there is a transition for the multiple shoots to form roots. Activated charcoal is added in the culture medium. So activated charcoal is a very important supplement in plant tissue culture. Now, inhibiting the activity of the phenol oxidases. I'm putting them all together, not calling them by any particular name. So all these enzymes, because they are utilizing phenols as their substrate, we can put them together as phenol oxidases. So the medium can be supplemented with chelating agents. So when you add EDTA, these chelating agents will take care of the substrate not being available to the enzyme, and as a result, the enzyme activity will be inhibited. So when you add chelating agents or increase slightly the concentration of iron EDTA, ensuring that there is no toxicity of iron, then you can decrease the activity of the enzyme phenol oxidases. Then one I have already mentioned, that the activity will be directly proportional to the substrate availability. And if you remove whatever leachates are there, or you absorb them, then substrate will not be available, and as a result, the enzyme will be non-functional. Then all of you have studied that each and every enzyme has an optimum pH at which it functions properly, because the active sites of the substrate, or other active sites of the enzyme, are made available depending upon the pH of the solution. This enzyme requires an optimum pH of 6.7. And if the pH is slightly lowered, then the enzyme becomes non-functional. So as a result, if the enzyme, the active sites are not available, substrate binding will not take place, and enzyme activity will be lowered, or it will be negligible. So that is another method of what you can say inhibiting the enzyme activity. Then media components and supplement, one which we already saw, that is by adding the activated charcoal, then you can reduce the amount of polyphenol oxidase activity. Then physical factors like light. Light also has an important effect on the activity of this enzyme. So in presence of light, it is more active, but if it is dark, the activity is comparatively less. So you can use factors which will inhibit the activity of these enzymes and take care of the problem of browning. Are you with me? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Now we come to the second important problem, that is biological contaminants. Now, this is another very, very important, what you can say, skill that you must acquire, because if you end up being in a quality assurance, these skills sets will come handy to you. Now, in a tissue culture laboratory, what do you have? The laboratory itself should be totally clean. Right? Now, in the laboratory, what do you have? You have the solid surfaces. Solid surfaces means the area where you are keeping your glassware, or the laminar airflow bench. Then you have areas, floor. Then you have the ceiling, the walls. So these are the solid surfaces. Is that clear? Then you have the air, the laboratory air which is there. Then very important, the human traffic. So normally in any culture room, you don't have many people working. So if there is a commercial lab, the inoculation area is a clean room area. where there are many laminar airflows or transfer benches available. And then the incubation area is another clean area where the cultures are incubated. Now, to prevent the air traffic, normally the culture rooms and the inoculation area are provided with a double door. So when you have a double door, you have an air gap. So you have an outside door, then you have a small area where you enter, and this area is provided with an air curtain or an air shower. Now, what does it remind you? Does it not remind you of Corona these days, where people are using those tunnels containing disinfectants, which is only basically bleach or chlorine, isn't it? Then the people pass through it and then enter. Yes? Do you recall?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, they are showing in many televisions, right? And then now this has become a new business where there are suppliers now who supply these tunnels, and these tunnels are provided with sprinklers, which are what you can say, they are automated, like they are sensitive. The moment somebody enters in, sprinklers will come on and you will get disinfectant, and then you enter out. But then here disinfection is not by using any liquid spray. It is by showering a person using sterile air. So the showers are called air showers. And what you wear, the entire kit is also different. You cannot enter the lab wearing the clothes that you've worn. So usually you have an entire lab coat, then you have a head gear, that means covering of your head, so hair, etc. is not exposed. Then you have the face mask, which covers your mouth. Maximum contamination comes due to our breathing. So when we are breathing, there are a large number of microorganisms which are released, and as a result, cultures may get contaminated. All these areas are restricted areas. That means people cannot just walk in and walk out. So you have restriction that only authorized people will enter the transfer area and the culture room. So we are going to talk about laboratory sanitation a little more in detail, because this is one very important aspect that you should be knowing about. Then there are biological quality control procedures being laid down. So these are laid down as to what is the amount of contamination which is what you can say admissible, because you cannot have a laboratory which does not have any microorganisms. There are going to be there, even if it is a very, very clean room, but there is a level which is permissible. Then if your explant itself is contaminated, then you have learned that there is a sterilization procedure in place to take care of the surface contamination. So you use a bacillocide, you use a surfactant, then you use a mild sterilizing agent like sodium hypochlorite, or you use a strong sterilizing agent like mercury chloride, and a two-step sterilization using ethanol also. However, all these will take care of only surface contamination. So that means whatever contamination is present on the surface of the explant will die. But there are some contaminations which are systemic or they are endophytic. That means they are inside the tissue, and if they are inside the tissue, they may not show up in the initial stages, but they may show up later on once the cultures grow, and that can be very, very what you can say disappointing, because you want to lose a large number of cultures. So it's very, very important to identify whether your mother plant or the plant material that you're going to culture is free of any such contamination. So you're going to study a very important technique, that is plant indexing procedure. So you're going to study how you can index whether, so there are agro clinics, you might have heard about it. So in agro clinics, they index the plant and they will certify whether it is clean or not, and if it is clean, then only it is taken up for propagation, whether it is by conventional method or it is by Tissue culture method. But this procedure is also very important when you are talking about quarantines. So if you are going to bring material, see, there are permissions which can be availed of for bringing any foreign living material into another country. But then there are strict procedures laid down to ensure that. So you need a certificate that it is clean, and then only you can bring and you can, what you can say, acclimatize it into your own country. And that is known as a plant indexing procedure. Now, in plant indexing procedures, there are now new techniques which are available. As you know that the conventional method of microscopy and all has been taken over by tools of molecular biology and proteomics. So you have very good techniques which are available, which are also rapid, and these are sure shot techniques for indexing plant material. So modern techniques also you will be studying. However, the basal point or the take-home message is you want contamination-free laboratory, you want contamination-free explant, and finally you want all the plantlets which are growing in vitro to be free of any contamination, and they should be totally clean. Are you with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now the first thing is your laboratory sanitation. Now what is a laboratory? Can you repeat? What did I say about the surfaces? What are the surfaces which are there in the lab? Yes, I told na. What are the surfaces? Tell me, in the laboratory, Somnath. And you can correlate with what is happening nowadays. Same thing you are telling, right? Wash your hand, clean the surfaces with soap and detergent. Hygiene is very, very important. So what are the surfaces in any laboratory?
Lab floors, walls,
Air flows,
windows,
laminar airflow, the bench, then table on
window,
which you are keeping all your equipments, then
floor,
floor,
ceiling,
then ceiling, yes, then
walls,
walls. Very good. Okay. Then all the equipments which are lying around. So if there is a shaker there or there is a microscope which is there, all this also will come into surface. Then you also have the air which is circulating in the room. So there can be a lot of microbial population in the air. You have done a very good experiment in your third year class where you studied your air mycoflora, that means fungal spores which are there in the air, and air microflora, that is the bacterial spores which are present, by using a Petri plate expose method. So same thing we are going to now apply when you are practically doing it in any laboratory. So it can be a lab which is a microbial testing lab, or it can be a lab which is following molecular biological diagnostic tools, or it is a tissue culture lab, or it is an operation theater, or it is an in vitro fertilization. See, that is another very big area where you have embryos being produced outside and then people are impregnated with it. So you have in vitro fertilization or an animal cell culture laboratory. Whatever the case may be, laboratory sanitation is of prime importance. What is the aim of laboratory sanitation? Is to reduce and keep the microbial population in air and the surfaces at acceptable levels. Very simple, is by regular cleaning of surface with water, soap or detergent. And you know that surfactants will solubilize the lipids on the cell wall, and as a result the microorganisms will die. So this is a very simple, easy method to be practiced. However, the material that you use for cleaning should also be sterilized. So you cannot use a dirty cloth and then clean it. Then infestation of the lab, transfer area and culture room. So the laminar airflow bench is white with 70% ethanol. I've already told you the reason for using ethanol, because it coagulates the proteins and rendering the microorganisms non-viable. And you use 70% because you want it in a hydrated state. You want ethanol to penetrate the cell and then kill the microorganism. Then you have what you can say, you also switch on the UV in the laminar airflow to kill. So you use a physical method for a microbicidal activity. Microcidal activity, sorry. Then your transfer area should also be totally clean. Your culture room should also be clean. Your media should be properly sterilized. Very often, students are very much in a hurry because they switch on they make the media, they switch on the autoclave, and then they don't wait for the complete 20 minutes to get over. Before that, they switch it off because they are interested in going back home. Wrong. You cannot do that. You have to allow sterilization to proceed for the complete duration of time. And then let the autoclave cool properly. Take out the media and then keep it in the sterile room. The reason is, if you take out a media when it is very hot, immediately there'll be exchange. Outside air is cooler. The media is hot. So immediately a lot of air will be taken inside and the probability of contamination increases a lot. And this is a mistake which very often students do because they are very much in a hurry to complete the task. Then you must never inoculate it on the next day. You must let the medium sit in the room for at least 2 days or in the sterile room for 2 days. And if the medium is not sterilized properly, then the contaminants will show up. That means your media will show bacteria or fungus depending upon the contamination. So you're better off discarding the medium rather than doing the entire procedure of sterilization and transferring the explant and then end up being disappointed because you've got contamination. Further, contamination levels also increase depending on season. So usually the rainy season, when the moisture is very high, relative humidity is high, then the rate of contamination is also very high. So normally subculturing is done at a greater period. You don't subculture the material very frequently because you don't want a large amount of contamination. Then your culture vessel, the equipment. Sometimes students or people, what do they think? Oh, the scalpels and the forceps were sterilized, I'm going to just flame it and use it. No, you must always use a fresh set of equipment whenever you are starting your culture. Flaming the mouth of the culture vessel and the instruments that you are using and allowing it to cool before you do the transfer procedure is also important. Flaming again will kill the microorganism. The area around the flame is normally a sterile area. So no, as much as possible, you must be very quick in the transfer and you must do the transfers near the flame area so that your probability of contamination is also reduced. Is that clear? And your sterilization of explant is also very, very important. It has to be done very meticulously without missing out any step. So each and every step counts. Anywhere if there is a mistake, then you will end up getting a contamination and your entire procedure will will be rendered invalid and you have to start all over again. Normally, the number of contamination should not be more than 1%. But when you're taking less number of cultures, 1% becomes very high. So when I'm saying 1%, it is when you have cultures in lakhs. But if you're doing only 10 test tubes and you get 1%, I think it's a total failure. You cannot do that. 1% when you're talking 1% means at a commercial level, not at a lab level when your number is less. The human element, people should be very clean. You should wash your hands with soap. And normally what happens if there's a good laboratory, You don't touch the tap with your hand. It is usually, you have a big handle like thing and you use your elbow to open the tap and close the tap, and you have to wash your hand properly. Your hair should be properly tied, covered with a, what you can say, covering, and their mouth with mask, and you must always wear a lab coat. People should wear protective goggles when they are working under a laminar airflow, and you must ensure that the individuals who are working should be totally clean. Then the laminar airflow also requires regular servicing. In what way? There are two filters. One is the pressure thing which is there at the base. That filter should be properly cleaned, and then the HEPA filter. The HEPA filter also should be cleaned properly. And how can you find out whether it is working properly or not? By looking at the manometer which is there on the laminar airflow. The air conditioners which are there are the biggest source of contamination. Therefore, people also, what you can say, advise that you must have your air conditioner serviced very often. Otherwise, you will end up with respiratory ailments, because the air conditioner has moist air sitting there for quite some time. So it becomes a very good breeding ground for these microbes, and the rate of contamination can be the air conditioner filter. So normally in culture room, these have another filter to ensure that you have clean air within the room. So as mentioned, each and every aspect which is there in the tissue culture lab should be properly sterilized so that they cannot be a reason for contamination. So I'm going to stop here, and then I will take it next time, because I want you all to learn this properly. Something called a standard operating procedure which should be followed in any lab, whether it is for contamination, or it is for standardizing an equipment, or it is for doing a physiology experiment. So standard operating procedures have to be followed, or they are known as SOPs. Is that clear? Did you follow?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes,
I'll
ma'am.
be sharing this PPT with you. And next week, I'll be continuing with this and talk more about it. Okay, you can pause the recording.
Good morning, students.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
So last time, we first discussed RNA world hypothesis, and then we did ribozymes. What are ribozymes? Can you recall what are ribozymes?
Ma'am, they are RNA which can function as enzymes also.
Yes, they are catalytic RNAs. Okay, RNA molecules which can catalyze a particular biochemical reaction. Now, and yes, I put two references on ribozymes. One is in the form of PDF on Google Classroom, and other is I put a link of that page on our WhatsApp group. Okay, so please read them. At the end of that lecture, we stopped at this particular slide, which is of termination of transcription. Okay, and I told you that you have to focus on this secondary structure of RNA. This particular secondary structure is performing a function of termination in this diagram. That means this is particular hairpin structure, and it has a particular structure that this hairpin is made up of stem and loop. The stem has the complementary base pairing, and the loop does not have any complementary base pairing. And second structural part is this continuous uracil nucleotides. This is a particular structure of hairpin which terminates the transcription. Okay. Now, the important point here is that RNA can form secondary structure so that they can perform a particular function. So here it is terminating the transcription. Okay. Now, so far we have done, you know that RNA can be a genetic material. It has the ability to access genetic material. And second is ribozymes. RNA can act as enzymes. It can perform biochemical reactions. Now, apart from these two, one important property in the living cell is that the cell has to sense the concentration of a particular metabolite inside. Okay. Now, what I mean by this? See, gene is expressed and it forms a polypeptide. Ultimately, after if it is required, it will get folded and form a tertiary structure, that is protein. So gene is expressed to form proteins, and then that protein will perform a particular function. If it is enzyme, it will go into the metabolic pathways. You know what are metabolic pathways? Either catabolism or anabolism. So in that pathway, most cases it is enzyme. So it will perform its particular function. So when this machinery, the central dogma, that is gene expression, is taking place, transcription and translation, it is forming protein, and that protein is performing a function, there should be a communication between these two. There should be an interaction. Means if that protein is required in more amounts, then the gene expression rate should increase. If that protein is required in less amount, then the gene expression rate should decrease. Okay, so this is called as the regulation part. You know, there are two types of genes: housekeeping genes and inducible genes. What are housekeeping genes? Housekeeping genes are expressed 24/7. They are always expressed. So for example, respiratory genes. Okay, every cell respires all the time. So all the respiratory enzymes particularly are expressed all the time. So those genes are expressed all the time. So though they are expressed all the time does not mean they are expressed at the same rate all the time. If a particular enzyme is required in less amount, then the gene expression rate will decrease, and vice versa. If it is required in more amount, the demand is more, then the expression should increase, or if the demand is less, then the expression should decrease. So there is this regulatory part, increase or decrease. And second part of gene, second type of gene is inducible genes. Inducible genes means they are induced, means they get operated only at the in the particular situation. Like if the metabolite is present, then the particular gene will express itself. So that type of regulation is on and off. Whether the gene is turned on in the presence, for example, if it is not there, not required, then it will be turned off. So that is on and off regulation. In housekeeping genes, it is mostly, because they cannot be turned off, it is usually increase or decrease. And we have done this part in transcription. You know transcription factors, you know enhancers, the regions to which activators bind, and what is the result? Increase in transcription. Then you know silencers to which repressors bind, and what is the result? Decrease in transcription. So what are these transcription factors, activators, repressors? All these are proteins. So gene regulation is, in today's world, is a function of proteins. Most of the proteins are regulatory in function. They regulate gene expression in response to the changing environmental condition. And here I mean inside the cell. So that means if a particular protein is not required, then it will be synthesized in less amount. If it is required, and there is more amount. So that means that in the system, the gene expression is sensing a particular metabolite. And what is usually the particular metabolite is the ultimate product. So it is important property that the cell should be able to sense a metabolite concentration in the cell itself, inside. So that if it is required, then it will express the gene. If it is not required, it is not expressing the gene. Because you know that transcription and translation are highly energy consuming processes. Each step of transcription, RNA polymerase requires an ATP. Each step of translation requires an ATP. So it is highly energy consuming process. So if a ultimate product is not required, why to waste energy, right? So this is an important property. So I told you that in today's world, it is the function of proteins. But in RNA world, if this world ever did exist, that RNA should perform this function. So that means RNA should have the property to sense the concentration of metabolite in the cell. And does the RNA has this property? The answer is yes. And these RNAs, the sequences which can perform this function are called riboswitches. And this is our next topic, riboswitches. The first point is the definition. Riboswitches are structural regulatory elements generally found in 5' UTRs of messenger RNA, which allow the regulation of a downstream gene or operon in response to binding of small molecules such as cellular metabolites or metal ions. This is a long definition. We'll come to this definition later. Look at the second point. Riboswitches are most often located in the 5' UTR. Now here in riboswitches, we will be talking about mRNA. Okay. Remember mRNA, and look at this structure, this diagram. You are familiar with this diagram now. This is the general structure of mRNA. So mRNA has 3 parts. After it gets fully synthesized, it has 5' UTR, means 5' untranslated region. That means this particular region will not get translated. Second is protein coding sequence, which will have amino acid sequence, which will get translated, and again there is a 3' UTR. 3' untranslated region will not get translated. So this is the general structure, and here I'm making a point that riboswitches are usually located at the 5' UTR. So that means here. And now compare this diagram with this diagram. Now you can see this is the riboswitch, which is in the 5' UTR. Okay, these are the same parts. 5' UTR coding region and 3' UTR. Remember the position of the riboswitch, because usually the riboswitch is present in the 5' UTR. This is the first AUG, means this is the start codon. So here is the translation start site. So this is the first codon to be translated. And here is the stop codon. This is the translation stop site. Okay, and here is this is a 3' UTR. So we are in this topic, we are interested in this riboswitch, which is located at the in the 5' UTR region. Now this riboswitch, you can see it is forming the secondary structure. This is the primary structure. It's a single stranded. It is mRNA. So obviously this is a single stranded structure. But here it is forming the secondary structure in the form of stem and loop. Now you know that stem means here must have been a complementary sequence, and loop means there is no complementary sequence, complementary base pairing. So that means this riboswitch has a sequence which can form this secondary structure. Okay. Now look at the third point. Most of the known riboswitches have been discovered in bacteria. This is important, that most of the riboswitches which we know till date are discovered in bacteria. Only one there is exception of this is TPP riboswitch. This TPP riboswitch is the only riboswitch which have been discovered in eukaryotes. TPP means thiamine pyrophosphate. This thiamine pyrophosphate is a cofactor, and also it is a form of vitamin B1. It is used in the metabolism of carbohydrates and amino acids. So only this one riboswitch has been discovered in eukaryotes so far. In plants, this riboswitch is found in 3' UTR. See, here this riboswitch is in the 3' UTR. Not necessarily that all riboswitches should be present in 5' UTR. This is the normal, usual position, but see, here is the exception. And it regulates the alternative lengths of the transcript and thereby mRNA stability. In fungi, it is found in within introns and controls the alternative splicing. So here in plants, this riboswitch is controlling alternative lengths. So there could be, this could be the site of poly A, polyadenylation. And in fungi, It is within the introns and controlling alternative splicing. So ribose switch can have diverse functions. When you say gene regulation, so regulation can be at different levels. Gene can be regulated at in eukaryotes there is a processing. So in eukaryote this processing provides an additional step of regulation. Okay, first in eukaryotes, first transcription takes place, then processing. In processing again there are 3 steps and then translation. So if the particular protein, the ultimate protein is not required, or it has to be controlled, so it can be controlled at various levels. It can be controlled at transcription, processing, translation. Okay, so there are many steps at which it can be controlled. In prokaryotes there is only transcription and translation, no processing. So in bacteria, it is, if you think logically, it would be better to control gene expression at transcription level. If transcription is controlled, no translation. So most of the ribose switches regulate transcription. If it passed the expression of the gene past transcription, then there is no option to control gene expression at translation level. There are mechanisms to control translation also, but first in this topic we will be dealing with how transcription is controlled by ribose switches. Now the next point is they are cis-acting elements. Now what do you mean by cis-acting elements? Cis-acting means, you know, the word cis and second is trans. So there are 2 terms, cis-acting elements and trans-acting elements. We will be encountering these terms in this as well as the next topic. Cis-acting means they act on the same molecule. No, there is a in isomers also there are cis isomers and trans isomers. So cis means on the same side, trans means on the other side. So here cis-acting elements means the element is present in the same molecule and act on itself. So here they act on the same molecule in which they are coded, and trans-acting elements means they will act on the other molecule. So here you can see this ribose switches are cis-acting element. That means this particular ribose switch will act on this mRNA itself in which it is coded. Okay, so now this property is very important property, that RNA can act on itself. Even ribozymes, you know now that they can act on itself. They can cleave themselves, they can join themselves. So they can act on itself. They can act on themselves. So this property is important because we are talking about the RNA world hypothesis, and if this hypothesis is correct, then RNA is a precursor molecule, then that means the RNA was the sole molecule. So that molecule has to act on itself because there is no other compound is present to help it, right? So it has to act on itself. So this property becomes very important in support of RNA world hypothesis. So far, remember this position, it is at the 5' UTR. Now let's see the structure of ribose switches. Now ribose switch is composed of 2 domains, aptamer domain and expression platform. And remember the function of ribose switch will sense the concentration of a particular metabolite in the cell. It is made up of 2 domains, aptamer and expression platform. Now these 2 are domains. Now what are domains? Domains are actually they are 3-dimensional structures, and here we will encounter 3-dimensional structures in RNA. And usually when you say domain, these are independently acting regions. You must have heard this word when you must have studied protein structure. In proteins also there are domains. Okay, and the property of these domain regions are they can act independently. That means this aptamer domain and expression platform, they two can interact, and otherwise the second thing, they can act independently also. So in this diagram, look at this diagram. This is aptamer domain and this is expression platform. So what is the function of aptamer domain? Aptamer domain acts as a receptor for specifically binds to ligand. So this is aptamer domain in red, expression platform is in blue. So you can see here, this in this diagram, this interaction is showing that this aptamer domain is reacting to the ligand. So this ligand can bind to this aptamer region. Aptamer, the word aptus in Latin means fit. So when the ligand binds, this region fits with respect to that ligand. And second is expression platform. As the name suggests, expression platform. That means when the ligand binds to aptamer domain, the result is expressed in this expression platform. So expression platform acts directly on gene expression through the ability to toggle between two different secondary structures. Now, look at this diagram. In this diagram, there are two different situations, M minus and M plus. M is metabolite. So when the metabolite is absent, this is the structure. Okay. Aptamer domain, see there is no metabolite, and look at the expression platform. Okay, expression platform has this particular structure. And look at the structure when the metabolite is present. You can see here, the structure is different. It has slightly bent and it is interacting. And see the expression platform. Expression platform is forming a different secondary structure in the presence of metabolite. Okay, so this particular scenario is present in biosynthesis operons. Now we are talking about bacteria. So bacteria, they have operons. So in biosynthesizing operons, this could be the condition that when the metabolite is absent, this structure will form and it signals anti-termination. This AT is for anti-termination. Anti-termination means against the termination. That means the gene will get expressed and metabolite is present. So it will form a termination structure. So that means the signal goes of termination. So terminate the transcription. This diagram is showing the same. This is aptamer domain. And you can see here is the binding is shown properly. This M is binding to this aptamer domain and expression platform express itself. This is the M minus condition. When M plus metabolite is present, then it forms this structure. This is termination. Okay. Now, the third region. See here, this is switching sequence. What is switching sequence? Switching sequence is a common sequence which is present in aptamer as well as expression platform. These two colors are merging and this purple region is the switching sequence. It switches between anti-termination and termination. So switching sequence is a part of anti-termination loop as well as termination loop. Okay, and this is important because these two structures in expression platform are exclusive. Exclusive means if one forms, other cannot form. If anti-termination loop forms, termination cannot form, and vice versa. This is important because only one signal should be sent at a time. And in this diagram, see, this is red is a switching sequence. You can see in anti-termination as well as termination, this red sequence is taking part. I said that this phenomena is particularly for biosynthesis operons. Now, what I mean by biosynthesis operons? Suppose it's an example that one operon is synthesizing enzymes to biosynthesize a protein or a metabolite X. Okay, so that X biosynthesis, X metabolite biosynthesis is taking place, and to synthesize that X metabolite, require 3 enzymes. Okay, for biosynthesizing X metabolite, the cell requires 3 enzymes, and that particular operon having the genes for those 3 enzymes. Okay, let's say A, B, C. These 3 genes are required. These 3 genes will form A, B, C enzymes, and these enzymes will biosynthesize a metabolite X. Suppose this metabolite X is not required in the cell. Okay, suppose this metabolite is, let's see, is not present in the cell. Okay, so that means if it is not present in the cell, biosynthesis is required. That means those genes should be transcribed. So that this is the case. When that metabolite is not there in the cell, then the gene should be expressed because the genes are required for its biosynthesis. And M plus means if it is present, no need to synthesize it because it is already present in the cell. So biosynthesizing enzymes are not required, right? So that means the ligand which binds to ribose switch is the ultimate product of that gene or operon. Okay, and it could be, here I've given you example of biosynthesis operon. Some operons could be for metabolism, so there could be a different case. Okay, so these are the functions of ribose switch, how ribose switch works. In metabolizing operon, it could be reverse. Okay, if you want to metabolize a metabolite in the cell, then you need those enzymes only when the metabolite is present. If X is now a metabolite, okay, if cell wants to metabolize that X, means degrade. Okay, so when that metabolite is present, then metabolizing enzymes are required. If it is not there, why to synthesize those enzymes for metabolism, right? So it depends upon the situation, what that operon codes for, if it is biosynthesizing or if it is metabolism. So this is the part of regulation. Okay, and here these ribose switches are sensing the concentration of that particular metabolite in the cell. Okay, if it is present in biosynthesis pathway, then no need to synthesize it. If it is not present, then the cell need to synthesize it. Okay, now let's go back to the definition of ribose switch. Now we'll read the definition again. So ribose switches are structural regulatory elements. Okay, they are usually found in 5' UTR of mRNA, which allows regulation of downstream gene. Why downstream? Because they are located in the 5' UTR. So they are present before the gene. So the gene will be downstream, gene or operon in response to binding of small molecules such as cellular metabolites or metal ions. These metal ions can also bind like Mg+2, and there are other metal ions also which can bind and regulate the gene expression. So this was about the structure of ribose switch. These are the known ribose switches. See the ligand type. First is enzyme cofactor. Now enzymes require different cofactors for their activity. So here they have listed two types, S-adenosylmethionine and thiamine pyrophosphate. And see the discovery, these ribose switches are also pretty recent. And this is a class of ribose switch. S-adenosylmethionine, you know, we have came across this in 5' capping. That methyl group is donated by this S-adenosylmethionine in methyl transferase enzymes. This is the thiamine pyrophosphate, which is the only ribose switch found in eukaryotes. Then second is nucleotide precursor, guanine, adenine, and 2' deoxyguanosine. This particular is a ribose switch family. This ribose switch family has this 3 ligands. The same ribose switch has a specificity for 3 ligands. This is again a special type of ribose switch. Then amino acid, lysine. There are other ribose switches also for amino acids. And then metal ion, this is magnesium. So these are some of the known ribose switches. There are other ribose switches also that have been found in prokaryotes. So this rest of these are in prokaryotes, only TPP is in eukaryotes. Now let's explain this ribose switch with the help of examples. So here I'm giving you example of purine ribose switch family, which I've told you that this is a special ribose switch because it has a specificity for 3 ligands. You know that in adenine and guanine, the structural difference is very less. Both are purines, but this particular ribose switch can differentiate between these two significantly. So purine riboswitch family includes adenine, guanine, and 2' deoxyguanosine classes. Now the structure of riboswitch. This riboswitch has a secondary structure which is made up of 3 pairing regions. So here is that riboswitch. The first the upper diagram is of the general riboswitch, and the second diagram is of guanine specific riboswitch. Okay. Now these are the pairing regions. You can see stem loop structures. So they are paired regions. So it is called as P1, P2, and P3. And these are joining regions. So this region, this purple region joins P1 and P2. So it is joining 1, 2. This joining region 2, 3. It is joining P2 and P3. And this region is joining P1 and P3. So it is joining region 3, 1. So it is, they are going clockwise, 1, 2, 2, 3, and 3, 1. So there are 3 pairing regions, 3 joining regions, and 2 loops. This is L2 loop and this is L3 loop. This is a spread out or convenient structure. Here is the actual structure, 3-dimensional, when the ligand binds. So here is the interaction. L2 and L3, they interact and this structure is formed. And this C is the crystal structure, means actual 3-dimensional structure, because this is the 2-dimensional stem and loop, but in reality, in 3-dimensional structure, they form this helical structure. You can recall the structure of transfer RNA, the cloverleaf model, and the actual 3-dimensional structure, which was helical. Because RNA has a single-stranded structure. When it folds on itself, it will form a double-stranded helix upon itself. So this is that double-stranded helix. And this blue is the ligand. Okay. So this particular riboswitch has 3 regions, P1, P2, and P3. This 2 of these RNA helices, they are coaxial, means on the same axis, meaning that one axis is sit on the top of the other. So here, sorry, see, these 2 helices, they are one on the other. This J1 has gone behind this particular loop. So they can form a coaxial loops. And they are collinear also. The third helix P2 is adjacent to P3, and the terminal loops P2 and P3 together, they form a tertiary structure. So here in this is that tertiary structure where loop 2 and 3 are interacting, and this joining 2, 3 is placed such a way that it is upon this joining region 1, 2. This particular structure is required to bind to a ligand. Ligand should be bound such that it should interact with the aptamer region, and this tertiary structure completely encapsulates it. Okay, aptamer means fit, so that this ligand should fit into the structure. So here you can see that ligand is completely fitting. See, these are the interactions. This ligand is interacting with the joining region, joining loops, so that they completely encapsulate it, and that gives the specificity. This interaction gives the specificity to the particular riboswitch. I told you that this particular riboswitch family has 3 ligands, but they can differentiate. They can differentiate between guanine, adenine, as well as 2-deoxyguanosine. So this interaction, because they are so fitting to the ligand, they can differentiate between 2 different ligands. Now the last point is for the guanine riboswitch. Here in this, the lower diagram is of guanine specific riboswitch. So here you can see this is a guanine nitrogen base, which is bound to this region formed by this P1, P2, and P3. This P1, P2, and P3, they are forming this cavity like structure into which this guanine has been bound. Now, look here, this is the cytosine nucleotide in this riboswitch. This cytosine nucleotide is interacting with this G. Okay. Now in guanine, see here, this pyrimidine is Y position. It is 74 from the Watson-Crick base pairing. So even if you count, this C comes to be at the 74th position. Here they have numbered it 20, 40, 60, 80. So if you count, it is actually at the 74th position. So the 74th nucleotide interacts with the guanine, and this C74 is specific to guanine. If you see the structure of adenine riboswitch from the same family, purine riboswitch family, then the nucleotide is different. Different nucleotide is interacting with the adenine this nitrogen base. So that's how they differentiate between adenine and guanine. And when this 74th, this cytosine interacts with this G, it is held by 21 and 50th position. This A and this U also helps in interaction and stabilize the ligand. Okay, so these three nucleotides together stabilizes ligand in this aptamer site. And below, this is the switching sequence. Now you can see this is reversible. So this is a terminator stem and this is anti-terminator stem. So when the ligand is present, see the riboswitch is off. That means the gene is off. It is giving the off signal because it is forming a terminator stem. And this is a switching sequence. You can see the same sequence forming terminator stem as well as anti-terminator stem. Okay. So when the guanine binds to this riboswitch, then further the genes of this operon will not be transcribed. And if it is not there in the cell, then the expression is turned on. So gene will be transcribed. Now, how this happens? You have to remember the coupled transcription and translation, that when in bacteria, we are talking about the prokaryotes. So in bacteria, when the transcription is going on, the mRNA will come out of the RNA polymerase complex. So you know that mRNA is made up of three parts: 5' UTR, coding region, and 3' UTR. So when it comes out, first the 5' UTR will come out, then the coding region, and then 3' UTR will come out. So that's why these riboswitches are present in the 5' UTR. As soon as 5' UTR is synthesized, they form the secondary structure because they can form stem and loop structures. They have the complementary base pairing sequence. So as soon as they are formed, they form these structures. By the time when they form this structure, RNA polymerase is still synthesizing coding region. Okay, so immediately when this particular region is transcribed, it will form, if it binds to this ligand, so it gives a termination signal. So RNA polymerase will stop and there will not be transcription of that particular gene. So further mRNA transcription will not take place. But if this structure forms and ligand doesn't bind, okay, if ligand doesn't bind, that means it is not present in the cytoplasm. So it gives the anti-termination signal to RNA polymerase, and RNA polymerase continues transcription of that mRNA. Okay, so when mRNA is synthesized, then translation will follow and the enzymes will be synthesized. If the ultimate product is enzymes, those will be synthesized, and then this guanine will be synthesized ultimately. If we are talking about this particular gene or operon, then guanine synthesizing enzymes will be produced in the cell because it gives a signal that guanine is not present in the cell. So we need to synthesize it. So the enzymes will be synthesized. Okay. So this is how the riboswitch works. I've given you one example of riboswitch, that is purine riboswitch family, and we discussed guanine specific riboswitch. And remember these particular nucleotides, this U, A, and C. These three nucleotides will ensure the specificity of the ligand. If adenine, if you see the adenine riboswitch from the same family, different nucleotide interacts with adenine. Okay, because if you see the structure of guanine and adenine, they have almost a similar structure, only the slight difference is there. Even that slight difference can be sensed by this riboswitch. So there is specificity. See, all these properties in today's world are with proteins. Only proteins can synthesize, sense a particular metabolite, or when a substrate binds to the enzyme, then that lock and key mechanism takes place. It is very specific. Only one lock has only one key. So that method, this interaction is very specific. Enzyme substrate interaction. So this specificity is with proteins, but here these riboswitches also show exceptional specificity, but in particular in this family, purine riboswitch family. Rest of the riboswitches have only single, they prefer single ligand, but this particular riboswitch can differentiate between similar ligands, which is very important property of RNA molecules in riboswitches. Okay, so this was all about riboswitches. Any question? Or you want me to repeat some part in this particular topic? I'll be putting references. Yes, see, these are the two references which I have referred to. And these two are very good papers. You can see the publications, 2004 and 2010. So they are pretty recent, but these two are very good papers. So I'll be putting these on either WhatsApp or this Google Classroom, so you can refer. Yes. Any doubt?
मैम
Yes.
मैम एक क्वेश्चन है
पूछो ना.
मैम ये जो राइबो स्विचेस है ये उसी वक्त काम करेंगे जिस वक्त इनको काम करना होगा, मीन्स दे विल ओनली वर्क विथ आरएनएस, मतलब ऐसा नहीं होगा ना कि दिस विल इंटरफेयर विथ डीएनए का ट्रांसलेशन और ट्रांसक्रिप्शन.
डीएनए का ट्रांसलेशन, व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय इट?
मैम मेरा मतलब ये है कि सी इफ समथिंग आई वांट, मतलब एक प्रोटीन चाहिए और वो ट्रांसलेट हो रहा है एंड वो ट्रांसक्रिप्ट होके इस पे आया, यूटीआर आरएनए पे आया. अब नाउ दिस राइबो स्विच उसको आगे ये नहीं होने देंगे, मतलब उसको आगे ट्रांसलेट नहीं होने, ट्रांसलेट नहीं होने देंगे. ट्रांसक्रिप्शन हो गया एंड आई गॉट आरएनए, बट बिकॉज ऑफ दिस राइबो स्विच वो आगे ट्रांसलेट नहीं हो पा रहा है. ऐसा होगा कभी?
See, we are talking about bacteria, okay, because most of riboswitches have been discovered in bacteria. So in bacteria, the important property is coupled transcription and translation. I told you that gene expression can be regulated at both levels, transcription and translation. But see, logically, it is better to control it at the transcription level, right? If no transcription, then no translation. But if transcription has already taken place, then you have no option than controlling it at the translation level, right?
Yes.
So here I'm focusing on regulating transcription. So suppose one operon is getting transcribed. Okay, let's take an example. That operon is getting transcribed. So how will be the this organization when mRNA will get transcribed? This entire operon. Okay, this operon, suppose let's say have 3 genes. Then it will first have its 5' UTR. 5' UTR will be synthesized, and then gene 1, 2, 3 will be synthesized. Yes. mRNA containing gene 1, 2, 3, and then there will be 3' UTR.
Yes.
So as soon as this 5' UTR comes out of the RNA polymerase,
Yes.
okay, as soon as it gets synthesized, it forms a secondary structure. Immediately it forms secondary structures. See, this is happening simultaneously. RNA polymerase is synthesizing mRNA, but it has just synthesized 5' UTR. Immediately it forms secondary structure. And if this secondary structure binds to a ligand, so in this case guanine ligand, so it will give termination signal that if the guanine is present, why to synthesize enzymes for biosynthesizing that guanine. So these are cis acting elements. That's what I told you, that these are cis acting elements. Cis acting means they act on itself. So here we will be talking about the operon, which codes for biosynthesizing enzymes for this guanine. Every metabolite, if you synthesize something, okay, if you have to synthesize guanine, then you need some enzymes, some biochemical reaction has to take place, and those biochemical reactions which require enzymes. So biosynthesizing enzymes are required for a synthesis. So if that ultimate product is already present in the cell, why to synthesize enzymes, right?
Yes.
And if your second question, if transcription has already taken place, now already taken place cannot be the case in bacteria, because translation begins before the transcription takes place,
Yes.
right? Before transcription completes, translation starts. So sometimes what happens, if some genes they get controlled at the translation level, so what happens? And the third case could be it is at the both levels at the same time. Simultaneously, you control transcription as well as translation. When this will happen, when if you remember Shine-Delgado sequence, we will do this in the next unit, but in this answer, we will tell you that Shine-Delgado sequence has a RBS, ribosome binding site. Okay, and this is in the 5' UTR. If you remember, the mRNA in prokaryotes have this SD sequence, Shine-Delgado sequence, and
Yes,
this sequence acts as a ribosome binding site. So this sequence, ribosome will bind. So imagine if the ribose switch has overlap with the SD sequence, means that ribosome is overlapping with the this ribose switch overlaps with the RBS. So it
Yes.
covers the RBS.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So when RBS gets covered, ribosome cannot bind. So
Yes.
this in this particular case, this ribose switch is controlling transcription as well as translation at the same time. This has also been observed. You read that paper. This point is also there, that some ribose switches overlap with the RBS site, ribosome binding site, so that both processes gets controlled, transcription and translation. Because in bacteria it becomes important because they are coupled.
Yes. Both that's happening at the same time.
Same time, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ma'am,
Yes.
on Friday we have tests, so your topics will be included in that.
No, for the test, transcription will be there, the second unit, and processing will be till this splicing. Only capping, polyandration, and splicing. Okay, this part I'm not putting this part. राइबोसोम से आगे वाला नहीं डाल रही हूँ, ठीक है?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, so you have understood ribose switches. Let's go ahead. Next is non-coding RNAs. Now, what are, as the name suggests, non-coding RNAs? So the RNAs which do not code for protein are called as non-coding RNAs. These RNAs are not get translated into proteins. So apart from mRNAs, the rest all becomes non-coding RNAs. So here I have listed only some of the non-coding RNAs. There is a long list of non-coding RNAs which are functional. See, they are non-coding doesn't mean they are not functional. They are functional RNAs, only thing that they do not form any protein. That's why they are called non-coding. So here is the list. And we'll just see the type, the broad function of it. Okay, we will not going in any details of this RNAs. So in this list, you already know ribosomal RNA and transfer RNA. Now here the list is in alphabetical order. So we'll first see ribosomal RNA and transfer RNA. So ribosomal RNA, what is the size? It is in the structural component of ribosome. So it has a small subunit and large subunit. So these are the, they have given the size in terms of nucleotides. What is the function of ribosomal RNA? Is in the translation. And taxa, all organisms have ribosomal RNA. Next is transfer RNA. This transfer RNA size of nucleotides is around 76 to 90 nucleotides. What is the function? Transferring individual amino acids to growing peptide chain during translation. And they are also present in all organisms because these are the important RNAs required for gene expression. So they will obviously be present in all organisms. Then the next non-coding RNA you already know is this RNase P. This is H1 RNA component and it is a ribozyme. This ribozyme catalyzes the maturation of tRNA. Remember what this RNase P does in maturation of tRNA? By any chance you recall what is the function of RNase P? Okay. RNase P cut the 5' leader sequence. Okay, there is a leader sequence at the 5' end of primary transcript of transfer RNA. So it cuts that sequence and generates a 5' end of mature transfer RNA. It is also present in all organisms. Then we'll see the rest of the RNAs. First is microRNA. Short form is miRNA. And size is around 20 nucleotides. So this is a small RNA. You can see the name suggests microRNA. Then see short hairpin RNA. This is called as shRNA and the size is almost similar, around 19 to 29 nucleotides. And third I want to show you is this small interfering RNA, siRNA. See the size again in the same range, 20 to 25 nucleotides approximately. I'm focusing on these three because of their function. Okay, see the miRNA function is gene regulation, shRNA function is gene regulation, and same with the siRNA. Small interfering RNA, or it is also called as short interfering RNA. Short form is siRNA. So miRNA, shRNA, and siRNA are they have their role in gene regulation. Now this gene regulation, you have this part in the next semester. So in there you will study all these mRNAs, non-coding RNAs, microRNA, siRNA, some bit of short hairpin RNA also. So in gene regulation, I told you that there are different mechanisms of gene regulation. So these particularly work in RNA interference. Okay. And it is a method for gene silencing. So gene silencing by RNA interference. So these RNAs interfere with the gene expression and they regulate that particular gene. Usually they form double-stranded structure with mRNA and that mRNA is targeted for degradation. So that's how they regulate the gene expression. Okay. Only the last one is, yes. One more is small nuclear RNA. This snRNA you already know, around 150 nucleotides. And what is the function? Splicing and other functions. So in RNA processing, you have heard this snRNA in spliceosomes. Okay, in spliceosomes, this snRNA works in removing of introns and joining of exons. They are present in eukaryotes and archaea because RNA processing does not take place majorly in prokaryotes. And the last is signal recognition particle. Signal recognition particle RNA. The signal recognition particle is around 300 nucleotides as in the eukaryotes. And what is the function? Directs proteins to plasma membrane in prokaryotes or endoplasmic reticulum in eukaryotes, and they are present in all organisms. Now, this particular RNA is a part of SRP, signal recognition particle. This we will do in the next unit under the heading protein sorting. What happens after the protein is translated? After translation, protein needs to be sorted in the cell. So that protein sorting needs this SRP. And this signal recognition particle RNA is a component of that SRP, that particle which is required for directing these proteins in the cell. Okay, so these are some of the non-coding RNAs, which are the some I've listed because you already know, and some are important. So I've listed here these 8 non-coding RNAs. Okay. So I told you that we are not going in details of these. We'll just list their size, function, and in what organisms they are present. Okay. We'll stop here for the day. We have left with only one topic from this unit, that is RNA localization. So we'll complete that topic in the next lecture, and we'll start with the 4th unit next time. Okay.
Ma'am, I should stop the recording?
Yeah.